The silence wasn't a peaceful thing out here. It was heavy. It was a suffocating blanket, a constant reminder of the emptiness that had settled in my life since I'd left everything behind. I'd come to this cabin to find some quiet, some space to breathe. Instead, the quiet just amplified the noise inside my head. The noise of 1,000 regrets. Last night had been the worst. I'd sat on the porch, watching the stars come out, feeling like the universe was just a vast, indifferent canvas painted with light I couldn't reach. I'd finally gone inside when the cold got to be too much, and I'd fallen into a restless, fitful sleep, filled with half-formed nightmares I couldn't shake even after I woke up. I just pulled myself out of bed this morning, the heavy feeling of the previous night still clinging to me like a shroud. I hadn't even bothered to put on a shirt yet. The sun was streaming through the big glass sliding door that looked out onto the forest, a stark contrast to the gloom I felt. I was standing in the kitchen, about to make some coffee, when I heard it. A small, rustling sound, followed by a soft, almost imperceptible scrape against the wooden deck outside. It was a sound that didn't belong. It was too delicate, too deliberate for a deer or a squirrel. I froze. My heart, which had been a slow, tired drum for weeks, suddenly quickened. I walked slowly, cautiously, toward the glass door. My mind, still fuzzy from sleep and despair, was trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a raccoon. Maybe it was the wind. But a part of me, the part that had spent years in these woods, knew better. I reached the door and peered through the glass, my hand hovering over the handle, ready to pull it open. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. There, standing just outside the door, was a lynx. Its fur was a beautiful mottled brown and gray, with a distinct, almost regal look. Its ears were tipped with those characteristic black tufts. But what held me, what completely arrested my attention, was its face. The lynx was looking right at me. Its eyes, a pale, piercing yellow, weren't filled with aggression or a hunter's cold calculation. They were filled with something else. Something I couldn't quite name. Desperation, maybe. Or an incredible, unbelievable trust. My mind raced. Just yesterday, this same cat had tried to tear my arm off. I took a deep breath. I need to explain what happened yesterday first, because without that, this morning doesn't make any sense. Yesterday, I was out in the woods, trying to outrun my own head. My job, or what was my job until I took a leave of absence, was a Forest Service ranger. It was supposed to be my escape. I could lose myself in the miles of untouched wilderness, in the quiet rhythm of nature. But lately, even the trees felt like they were judging me. The silence, which I used to cherish, had become an accuser. I was maybe 3 miles deep into the preserve, just walking aimlessly, not checking traps or monitoring wildlife, which was my usual duty. I was just trying to walk until I was too tired to think anymore. And that's when I heard it. A guttural snarl, a sound of pure agony and rage. It was coming from a thick patch of brush, maybe 50 yards off the trail. My first instinct was to back away. A wounded animal, especially one as powerful as a lynx, is the most dangerous thing in the forest. But something, a flicker of something still alive inside me, pulled me forward. I pushed through the undergrowth, and the sight that met my eyes was awful. The lynx was there, her magnificent body thrashing, a thick leather and steel trap clamped down on her front right paw. It was an old poacher's trap, the kind that had been outlawed for decades. The animal was in a frenzy of pain and fury, the snarls ripping from her throat. She was trying to chew through her own leg. I could see the bone. My stomach turned. She was completely exhausted, but every time I moved, she would snarl and lunge, pulling against the trap, the chains groaning under the strain. Her leg was a bloody, mangled mess. I knew I couldn't leave her there to die. I couldn't. Not after everything. So I made a choice. I went back to my truck, which was parked a mile away, and grabbed my tools. I had a heavy-duty wire cutter, some leatherwork gloves, a heavy blanket, and some antiseptic spray and gauze that I always kept for emergencies. I knew what I was doing was insane. I was a trained ranger, but not for this. But I also knew I had to try. I returned to the lynx. The sun was starting to set, casting long, menacing shadows through the trees. The animal was still fighting, but her movements were weaker. Her eyes, those same piercing yellow eyes I saw this morning, were filled with a desperate, wild fear. I approached slowly, speaking in a low, calm voice. "Hey there, girl. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The The snarls didn't stop, but they were less powerful. I knew I only had one shot at this. I had to get the trap off. I crept closer, the gloves feeling thick and clumsy on my hands. I held the blanket up, trying to shield myself from her claws and teeth, and knelt down. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run. Her eyes followed my every move, watching me with an intensity that was terrifying. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, but I forced my hands to be steady. I got close enough to see the trap mechanism, rusted and old. I had to get my hands in there to pry it open, which meant getting uncomfortably close to those teeth. I knew what would happen if I made a single mistake. I would have a trip to the emergency room, and she would probably try to kill me. But I took a deep breath, and with one swift motion, I used my free hand to push down on the trap's lever. It was old and stiff, but it gave way just enough. She immediately tried to lunge at me, but I was ready. I threw the blanket over her head, muffling her thrashing, and pushed the lever all the way down. The trap sprung open with a loud thwack. She was free, but she didn't run. She lay there, panting, exhausted, the mangled paw a horrific sight. I carefully pulled the blanket off her, keeping my distance. Her gaze was still wild, but there was a different kind of look in her eyes. I took out the antiseptic spray and, with a trembling hand, began to gently clean the wound from a safe distance. She growled, but didn't fight. I carefully wrapped it with gauze, tying it as loosely as I could. After a few minutes, she slowly, tentatively, got to her feet. She put her weight on her 3 good legs, lifting the bandaged one. She looked at me one more time, and in her yellow eyes, I saw something. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't gratitude. It was more like an understanding, a shared moment between 2 wounded souls in the fading light of the forest. Then she turned and limped away into the darkness, a ghost disappearing into the trees. I sat there for a long time, the silence no longer heavy, but full of something new, something a little less empty. I had helped a creature in need. It was a tiny victory, but for the first time in months, it felt like a win. Now, back to this morning. The lynx was here, on my porch. I slowly, very slowly, opened the glass door. She didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on me, still filled with that strange, desperate look. And then I saw it. Tucked behind her, huddled close to her legs, were 3 tiny, wide-eyed balls of fluff. Lynx cubs. They were no bigger than house cats, their fur a faint, spotted version of their mother's. They were trembling slightly, their heads bowed. And then I understood. She didn't just come back to say thank you. She came back because she needed help. She was hungry. They were hungry. That wound from yesterday, it was slowing her down. She couldn't hunt. Not effectively. And without food, her cubs wouldn't survive. She was out of options, and she'd come to the only place she could think of. She'd come to me. My heart sank and swelled at the same time. The gravity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't just feed them some cat food and send them on their way. These were wild animals. But I couldn't just let them starve either. I looked at the mother lynx, her ribs showing under her fur, her gaze locked with mine. I saw the raw desperation in those eyes. She was entrusting me with her children's lives. It was an impossible, incredible show of trust. I took a step back, leaving the door open. I spoke to her, my voice low and calm. I remembered the words I'd spoken yesterday, the same quiet tone. It's okay. You're safe. You can come in. She hesitated for a long moment, a moment that felt like an eternity. She looked at the cubs, then back at me. Finally, with a small, almost imperceptible nod of her head, she picked up one of the cubs in her mouth, a tiny thing with a spotted coat, and took a hesitant step inside the cabin. One of the other cubs followed her, its little legs wobbling. The third one, looking the most scared, was still frozen on the porch. The mother lynx set down the first cub, nudged the second one inside, and then went back for the last one, carrying it in the same gentle, powerful grip. She placed it with the others and then looked at me, her gaze full of a silent plea. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. I couldn't keep wild animals in my home, but I couldn't just kick them out either. My first instinct was to call my friend Jack. Jack was a vet in the nearest town, maybe an hour away, a little too far to be convenient, but always a calming voice of reason. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. Jack picked up on the third ring. His voice was bright and cheerful, a stark contrast to my own state of mind. Hey buddy, what's up? I haven't heard from you in a while. Hey Jack, I need your help. I think you're gonna think I'm crazy. Jack laughed. That's not a high bar for you, David. What did you do? Adopt a bear? My voice dropped to a whisper. It's a lynx. And she brought her 3 cubs with her. They're in my living room right now. There was a long pause on the other end. I could practically hear his brain rebooting. A lynx? What are you talking about? You're not supposed to have wild animals. Is she hurt? Are you okay? I tried to explain the situation, my words a jumbled mess. I told him about the trap, about the wound, about her showing up this morning with the cubs. Jack was silent for a while. Look, David, I'm coming over. Don't do anything. Just stay calm. Don't try to touch them. I'll be there in about an hour. I hung up the phone and looked at the family of wild cats in my living room. They were huddled together in a corner, their mother watching my every move. I went into the kitchen and found some ground beef in the fridge. I placed a small bowl of water and the meat a safe distance from them. I didn't know if a lynx would eat ground beef, but I had to try. The mother lynx, after a moment, sniffed the air. She slowly walked to the bowl, looked at me one more time, and began to eat. The cubs, seeing her, tentatively followed suit, lapping up the water and nibbling at the meat. They were ravenous. An hour later, Jack's truck pulled up outside. He came in, his expression a mix of disbelief and concern. He was a tall, lanky man with a kind face and a practical mind. All right, David, where's this wild animal party? I just pointed to the corner. Jack stopped dead in his tracks. His jaw dropped. He just stared. I've seen a lot of things, David, but this is a first. How on earth? He shook his head and got to work. He was a professional. He carefully approached them, his vet kit in hand. The mother lynx, Serafina as I'd started to call her in my head, growled, but she let him get close enough to examine her paw and the cubs. He confirmed what I'd already known. The cubs were severely malnourished, but otherwise healthy. Serafina's wound was healing, but it was a nasty one. It would be a while before she could hunt properly. Jack and I spent the rest of the day building a temporary enclosure in a spare room, a makeshift sanctuary with blankets and food bowls. We talked about what to do next. Jack was pragmatic. We have to call the wildlife center. They'll take them in, rehabilitate them, and release them back into the wild. I hated that idea. A small part of me wanted to keep them, but a bigger, more rational part of me knew it wasn't an option. Still, I couldn't bring myself to make the call. I felt a connection to these animals. I felt responsible. I spent the next few days with them, just sitting and watching them, feeding them. My own problems, my own dark thoughts, they began to recede. My focus was on them. On Serafina, who was slowly but surely starting to put on weight. On the cubs, whom I'd named Alara, Evan, and Esme. They were tiny, mischievous little things. They would tumble and play with each other, their little growls and hisses filling the quiet cabin. I'd sit there and just watch them, a small, genuine smile on my face for the first time in what felt like forever. It was a new feeling, this sense of purpose. I was needed. A week later, I received a call from my sister, Sarah. We hadn't talked in months. Not since the incident that had sent me running to the woods. I felt a pang of guilt, but I answered. David, is that you? I've been worried sick. Her voice was full of concern. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed her. I told her everything. Not about the past, not yet, but about the lynx, about Serafina and the cubs. I expected her to laugh or call me crazy, but she didn't. That's incredible, David. She trusts you. She chose you. Her words hit me hard. She chose me. Sarah's support, her understanding, it was like a balm on an old wound. She told me she was proud of me. It was the first time I'd felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could go back to a normal life, to her. But the peace was short-lived. A few days later, while I was out getting supplies, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. A beat-up old truck, the kind that poachers drove, was parked on a side road near my cabin. I knew it. The markings on the side were familiar. They were back, the people who set the trap, and they knew there was a lynx in the area. They would be looking for her. I rushed back to the cabin, my mind a storm of panic. I couldn't let them get her. I couldn't let them hurt my family. My wild family. I called Jack. Jack, they're here. The poachers. I saw their truck. We have to move them. Now. Jack's voice was calm, but I could hear the urgency in it. Okay, David. I know a place. It's an old cave system deep in the heart of the preserve. It's almost impossible to find unless you know where you're looking. Get them ready. I'm on my way. When Jack arrived, we knew we were on a timer. The move was tense. Serafina was wary of leaving the safety of the cabin. She was protective of her cubs, and rightly so. We had to guide her, coax her with food and gentle words. She was still limping, but her strength was returning. Jack and I walked ahead, clearing the path, while Serafina followed behind us, the 3 little cubs trotting at her heels. We walked for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a couple of hours, deeper and deeper into the woods, to a place where no one ever came. The cave was perfect, tucked into a rocky outcropping. Its entrance was almost invisible from the outside. We set up a new temporary den for them, with fresh water and more food. As we were about to leave, I looked at Serafina one last time. She was lying there, her cubs curled up against her. She looked at me, and I looked back, and I saw it again. The trust. A silent, powerful acknowledgement. She knew what I had done. She knew I had saved her, and now her cubs. She was safe. They were safe. I turned and walked away. My mission was complete. It was time for me to let them go. That was the hardest part. The past few weeks had given me a purpose, something to live for. But they were wild animals. They belonged here, not with me. I had to let them go. I had to let go of the one thing that had brought me any kind of peace. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. I realized then that my life wasn't just about my own pain anymore. It was about something bigger. I went back to my cabin, packed my things, and called Sarah. "I'm coming home," I told her. "I'm ready." A few months passed. I was back in the city, working a new job, and rebuilding my life with Sarah. I still thought about the lynxes every day. So one weekend, I decided to take a trip back to the cabin. The forest was lush and green, alive with the sounds of summer. I hiked for a long time, back to the cave system where we'd left them. The entrance was overgrown with vines and moss. It was almost as if it had never existed. I didn't expect to see them. I just wanted to see the place where it all happened, where my life changed. I was about to turn back when I saw them. Not far off, a flash of movement. Serafina. She was hunting, and beside her were 3 full-grown, magnificent lynx, their bodies powerful and sleek. Alara, Evan, and Esme. They were no longer tiny cubs, but confident, wild hunters. They saw me, but they didn't run. They just stopped and looked. I stood there just watching. They were a family, whole and healthy, and they were thriving. This was their world. They weren't mine to keep. They were free. And then, Serafina, the mother, turned and looked at me. For one brief, beautiful moment, her yellow eyes met mine. And in that gaze, I didn't just see trust. I saw a silent thank you, a confirmation, a shared history. And then, with a flick of her tail, she turned and disappeared into the trees with her family. I stood there for a long time, a smile on my face. A real, genuine smile. For the first time in what felt like forever, the heavy silence of the forest was gone. It had been replaced with something new. A quiet contentment. An understanding. I had saved a family. And in doing so, I had saved myself. It was the best decision I'd ever made. But the story didn't end there. I didn't just turn and walk away. I stood motionless, watching them for a long while. The lynxes moved with an effortless grace, their large paws barely disturbing the leaf litter on the forest floor. They were a perfect, synchronized unit. I saw Alara, the smallest one, pounce playfully on a beetle, and Evan, the more cautious one, stop and sniff the air, his young ears perked up. Esme, the boldest, was already shadowing her mother, learning to hunt with a fierce intensity. They were not my animals. They were not my pets. They were wild, and that was exactly how they were meant to be. The weight of that truth, of letting them go, no longer felt like a loss, but a gift. Serafina, the matriarch, looked back at me one last time before disappearing behind a thick curtain of trees. Her eyes, those yellow, penetrating eyes, held no fear now, only a deep and knowing peace. It was a silent conversation that lasted only a moment, but it felt like a lifetime. In that single glance, I felt a release. The guilt I had carried for so long, the guilt that had driven me from my old life, began to lift. It was like she was telling me, without words, that it was okay to let go of the past. That just like her, I was free to move forward, stronger and wiser for what I had been through. I stood in that silent forest for maybe another hour, the sun beginning to cast long shadows through the trees. The hike back to the cabin wasn't a retreat anymore. It was a journey. I wasn't running from anything. I was walking towards something. My steps felt lighter. The air smelled sweeter. The forest, which had once felt like an unforgiving wilderness, now felt like an old friend. A place of healing. A sanctuary. That night, back in the cabin, I called Sarah again. We talked for hours. I told her every single detail, from finding Serafina in the trap to the final glance I had shared with her in the woods just a few hours ago. Sarah listened patiently, her voice warm and full of love. She told me that she had always known I was a good person, a strong person, even when I couldn't see it myself. She said that running away from the city hadn't been about weakness, but about finding my way back to myself. She was right. A week later, I was back in the city for good. The apartment felt different. The streets were noisy, crowded, and at first, a little overwhelming. But it was okay. I wasn't the same person who had left. I had a new job, one where I could use my knowledge of the outdoors to help educate people about conservation. I was rebuilding my relationship with Sarah, one conversation at a time. The past was still there, of course, a shadow I lived with. But it no longer defined me. The silence in the city wasn't heavy anymore. It was just quiet. Every now and then, on a particularly difficult day, I find myself looking at the small photo on my desk. It's a picture Jack sent me, a grainy trail cam shot he'd set up near the cave. It's a picture of Serafina and her cubs, a few weeks after we left them, looking healthy and strong. I never told Jack about the names I gave the cubs, but every time I look at that photo, I think of Alara, Evan, and Esme. And I think of their mother, Serafina. She didn't just bring her family to me that day. She brought me a purpose. She brought me a reason to fight for something more than my own survival. She brought me back to the world, and most importantly, she brought me back to myself. That act of kindness, that impossible trust, had healed me more profoundly than any amount of solitude ever could. And for that, I will be forever grateful.